Good afternoon and happy Thursday, everyone. Welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Jamie Henkel, and my pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Learning and Inclusion Manager at PFLAG National. Just like every week, we are going to bring in Jean Marie Nevada to lead today's conversation.
Jamie Henkel.
Hi, Jean Marie. It's been a while.
It has been I missed you. I mean, we see each other, but we don't see each other like this.
Yeah, I missed you. I'm also really excited about this week, and not just because of the topic, but because we are having the opportunity to introduce the newest member of our team.
We're no longer alone. We have someone else with us, Jamie. It's very exciting. And we're talking data, which I know is a huge thing for you because the two of us are numbers nerds. So you're going to be back, and we're going to get today's conversation started.
That's right. I'll see you soon.
Jamie. Hey, everybody. My name is Jean Marie Nevada. My pronouns are she and her, or if you speak Spanish, ella. And every single week, we get together to talk about something related to LGBTQ inclusion and equality. And this week, we are talking about some new research about the LGBTQ community, and specifically some of the data that came out around people who are bisexual identified. So if you want to join us today, you are certainly welcome to participate in the chat. But you should check out the article that we're going to be using and the questions from today by visiting straightforequality.org/discussion series. Now, today's article is entitled "Americans Are Identifying as LGBTQ More Than Ever," poll finds, and this was from ABC News. And just to give you an idea of some of the headlines, the big headline was that 5.6% of the American adult population identifies as LGBTQ, and that is up from 4.5% in 2017. And the breakdown was really interesting, and that's part of what we're going to talk about, because about 54.6% of people identified as bi, 24.5% of people identified as gay, 11.7% lesbian, 11.3% trans, and 3.3% said it was some other word that I used to describe myself, like same-gender loving, or perhaps queer, or more expansive. So to have this conversation, I am super excited. Jamie already sort of alluded to this. I want to introduce our guests for today. First, Mackenzie Hart, who is PFLAG's newest Learning and Inclusion Coordinator. Hello, Mackenzie, and the newest member of our team. And Alexandra Bolles, who is a member at large of the Bisexual Resource Center. Welcome, my friends.
Hey, guys.
Hey, so good to see you all. Thanks.
Thank you both for being here. And before we get started, Alexandra, can you just tell people a little bit about the Bisexual Resource Center so that way people have some background?
I would be very happy to. The Bisexual Resource Center is the oldest national organization serving the bisexual plus community. We connect the bi plus community and help its members thrive through resources, support, and celebration. And when I say bi plus, I mean anyone who is attracted to more than one gender. So regardless of the label they use, whether that's bisexual, pansexual, queer, fluid, whatever word you use to describe it, you're welcome under the Bisexual Plus umbrella, and the BRC welcomes you all. And this month we are celebrating #BiHealth Month all month long.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's really important that people know about the resource, because one of the most interesting pieces of the research that we're talking about today is actually the number of people who identified as bi, and particularly as you started to look at the breakdowns by generation, those numbers really, really looked very different in some areas. So Mackenzie, maybe we can start with you, which, our first question for today was, based on your personal experience and your professional experience, because you've, existed sort of in both of those spheres, did any of the findings on this data surprise you?
So first of all, hi, Alexandra. I'm so excited to be in the PFLAG family, and I'm so excited to be on this conversation with Alexandra, who I worked with at GLAD, and we did a lot of Bi Plus work together there that I continued in some time after, and I'm so excited that we're already reunited here. But as for some of the data, I honestly wasn't that surprised by the data that we saw overall, because we have seen that there's been a lot of progress towards acceptance of LGBTQ people. And as there's more acceptance, more people are then safe to come out, and more people are then safe to kind of understand their own identities and have their own identities understood. So I think that it makes total sense that we're seeing that younger and younger people are skewing more towards LGBTQ identities. And I think it also makes sense that we're seeing that younger people are identifying mostly as bi plus, because there's been significantly more understanding as acceptance has progressed and created this really positive cycle.
One of the things that I would love to get into, because I'm not sure that everybody necessarily has been part of this conversation, is there's been a lot of bias against people who are bi identified. And we've talked about this before, and how it affects not only how people's lives feel and look, but also how some of these numbers show up. So Alexandra, could you talk a little bit about some of that tension that happens, and what that looks like, and what it has done sort of inside of our LGBTQ spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I want to echo everything Mackenzie said. Mackenzie is such an incredible asset and leader within the LGBTQ plus advocacy movement, but especially within the bi plus community. And I'm so happy that they've joined the PFLAG family and that we get to chat together. To answer your question, I think, something that was not surprising to me about the Gallup poll findings is that bisexual plus people make up the majority of the LGBTQ community. We have for as far back as the research will allow us to show. But what is hard about that number, and where the disconnect comes in, is that while bisexual plus people make up the majority, we only receive 1% of the overall LGBTQ advocacy funding to meet our specific needs. And unfortunately, our needs are, statistically speaking, were greater than some of our gay and straight peers when it comes to things like social well-being, physical well-being, interpersonal violence. We see poverty, social isolation. We see much harder rates for bi plus people than we do for gay and straight peers. And a lot of that ties back into what Mackenzie was saying about advancements within acceptance and equality. The more people know of and about who bi plus people are in all of our intersections and diversities and unique needs, the better that is for us, because people know us better and are able to have the tools to challenge harmful stereotypes. And one example, I think, of how misconceptions and not knowing who bi plus people are can have a real world impact is kind of a grim example, but in, like I mentioned, there's higher rates of intimate partner violence against bi plus people than against gay and straight folks. And what we find in a lot of those moments of harm against bi plus people is that anti-bi stereotypes are invoked to justify that abuse. It's also used in cases of family exclusion and isolation. There's bi plus youth are overrepresented in the homeless population, and a lot of that has to do with rejection from family and not understanding who bi plus people are, and not being able to welcome them. So it's really great to see attention to the LGBTQ community as a whole, and the growing, percentage of bi plus folks represented in Gen Z. And we can all keep working together to learn more about who bi plus people are and how to meet their needs.
It just seems so difficult. I think often bi plus people are being sort of rejected on the LGB side of things, or LG side of things, and also really misunderstood among people who are outside of the community. Mm-hmm. Do you think, how do you both feel? Do you think that having research like this, having numbers, does that give you more power to have these conversations and have these conversations more effectively? Is this the kind of thing that's actually helpful?
It absolutely is. Part of the lack of funding comes from a lack of research. There's sort of a chicken and the egg situation, but the more research that we have that disaggregates the bi plus community from our gay peers and from our straight peers, the more justification we have to be able to apply for funding, and the more funding we have, then the more we can specifically meet the needs of bi plus people. And that's really what Bi Health Month's theme of equity this year is all about, is meeting people where they are and finding their specific needs and giving them the tools to sort of start on a level playing field with everyone else.
Fantastic. So one of the interesting things about this article, and I really encourage anyone who hasn't looked at it yet to definitely take a look at not just the data, but the discussion around the data, was the limitations of actually the surveys that are trying to assess people's sexual orientation and their gender identity. Mackenzie, could you talk a little bit about how this plays out, particularly inside of the BI+ community? Does this make getting the data more difficult, or is there more research needed, and what does that research look like?
So simple answer, yes, more research is needed. In a just world, there would be unlimited research for every marginalized group so that we can better understand the issues. With this survey itself, what I found was interesting is that they allowed individuals taking the survey to choose multiple options, which meant that, I think that's why we saw that there was substantially less in terms of percentage people who polled as lesbian and around double that for gays. So I think that's probably because many lesbian women probably selected both, but that does create kind of a lack of certainty in the polling that can be kind of hard to then continue looking at it with statistical significance. I think that another massive limitation of this particular survey is that gender identity was looped in with sexual orientation in many ways, that it was not necessarily saying, okay, what is your gender identity? And then in a separate category saying, what is your sexual orientation? And one issue that immediately creates is that it doesn't do anything to clarify the intersection of trans and non-binary gender identities with bi+ identities. And we've seen oftentimes that there's a very inaccurate trope thrown around that bi people are transphobic, or that bi people are only interested in men and women, or cis men and cis women, even that far. And that's just not true. Bi people are people who are attracted to genders like their own and genders unlike their own. And there are many different identities under that umbrella. And a majority of trans and non-binary people identify as bisexual. This poll, unfortunately, doesn't really show that. It kind of leaves that kind of open to be very uncertain, to be kind of unclear. That it's great that the poll included a lot of different categories, but it doesn't help that it kind of puts them all together in ways where it would have been more impactful and clearer, I believe, had they kind of allowed multiple different options to be categorized correctly. So with further bi research, I think that we have seen numerous times that bi people do face higher rates of a lot of the horrible mood disorders, intimate partner violence that Alexandra was talking about. And I think that continuing that research, continuing to show that finding the problems is helpful. But I think that further research, it will be really helpful to find bi people and to kind of create a qualitative type approach to figure out, okay, what can we do to fix this? What do bi people need? How can healthcare providers be more inclusive? How can mental health care providers be more inclusive? How can there be inclusive spaces for bi people? How can we look beyond, LGBTQ bars or queer bars because of alcohol abuse within the community? How can we find other spaces and still remain LGBTQ inclusive, and bi inclusive in the workplace, et cetera? There's a lot of other areas, and I think that research will be a great first step to kind of find what are the first steps, what do people need, what are they missing, and why is what they're missing creating some of these disparities that we're seeing.
One of the things I thought was really interesting in the article, and I was wondering if either one of you could speak to this a little bit, was there was a quote from Gary Gates at UCLA, and he said, "This is a matter of identity, not behavior." Is this a challenge that you find that you have with people? Because I feel like in many cases when I have been in conversations about people who are bi+, people seem to have an expectation that you need to be in relationships with people, with lots of different kinds of people, in order to qualify as validly bi. And we always talk about it's your identity. It's how you identify and see the world, not what you do. Do you think that could be one of the challenges inherent in the research here? Is this something that you talk about? I know, Alexandra, do you want to take that one?
Well, I think you raise a really important point that does, when I've seen that sort of misconception come up, that behavior defines identity a lot, I've often seen that it's rooted in a misunderstanding, again, of like who bi+ people are. And, I hate to make comparisons, but I do always say that like when straight people are single, they don't stop being straight. And the same general principle applies to bi+ people. No matter who you're dating or not dating, or how many people you're dating or not dating, you're still bi+, and that still looks like that an individual's identity, changes from person to person and manifests in so many ways. And Robin Oakes has a really, beautiful community standard definition of bi+. It essentially comes down to whether you're who you're with, how many people at what time, all of that can ebb and flow, but it doesn't change who you are in your core. And again, I think one of the things that I think the Bisexual Resource Center does really well is trying to meet people with all different types of experiences where they are. We've got a lot of some great support networks for bi plus women who are in relationship with men, for example. And their identities are just as valid and just as full and robust as anybody else's bi plus identity. So, I definitely think making room in future research for folks of a variety of experiences, behavioral experiences within the bi plus umbrella is vital for sure.
One of the things that is very interesting in the article is it talks about how these numbers broke out by generation. And I'm looking at one of the lines. It says, of the Generation Z adults who identify as LGBTQ, nearly 2/3 said they were bisexual, equal to about 11.5% of the total Gen Z respondents. Do you find that generationally, people on the whole, or are you seeing any trends towards understanding this identity versus behavior? Is it becoming stronger among people, or is this still an uphill battle in helping people understand that difference?
I think that it is really all about understanding. As we often say, LGBTQ people have always existed. We're always going to exist as long as the human race goes on, which, hit or miss with climate change. But but LGBTQ people have always existed. There just hasn't always been an understanding of that. I think that in the past, 10, 15 years, we've seen a real massive boom of understanding. It's not necessarily new identities, it's just a new understanding of your own identities. And so I think that we are going to see a continuation of these trends as more people understand themselves, as more people understand each other, as there's more comfort in being able to claim an identity for yourself, to actually speak out about how you identify. That's going to create a very positive cyclical effect that I think we're already in. I think that at this point, because so many Americans especially personally know someone who's LGBTQ at this point, they're not going to suddenly say, oh, you know what, actually, no, I don't agree with this community or this movement. We do see that with the trans and non-binary community, that number is significantly less. Mm-hmm. We've seen that bi people are not as comfortable to come out as gay and lesbian people, but we are seeing those numbers growing as well. And so my hope, but also my thought on this is that we are going to see this continue and see this continue to trend as more and more young people come out, as more and more young people grow up and begin to identify and find words that work for them. I think we're going to see that. I think we're probably going to see exciting words that haven't been mainstreamed yet, and I'm really looking forward to that as well. But I do think and hope that we are in a very positive cycle at this point to acceptance of all LGBTQ identities.
You said that so beautifully, and you really nailed so much. It really all just does come down to acceptance and access to tools and resources. And when Mackenzie and I worked together, we would joke about like the ways that we had to access information about who bi plus people are when we were growing up versus the kind of tools that we were striving to create for people on the internet today. I joke, it's true, but I laugh now that the first place I came out was on a Melanie Griffith message board, because like where else are you going to come out when you're like in 6th grade, I guess. But now, the youths of today, anyone of any age can just search a hashtag on any platform, on any social platform, and you get to see like the beautiful rainbow of the bi plus community, and you see so much fun within that. And there's like a collective language and community that is now sort of built into folks who have that access. I also wanted to give I think what you were saying, Mackenzie, about LGBTQ plus people being around since the beginning of history, and is such an important point, because I think the elders in our community often don't get the recognition and resources that they deserve. And so many of the leaders, grassroots leaders of the LGBTQ advocacy movement are bi plus, were bi plus. PFLAG Queens just honored 2 community elders in the bi plus community. Brenda Howard is considered the mother of pride, and she was a bi plus woman. And it's it all comes down to sort of making sure that those stories are told and accessible to a diverse audience.
I totally agree. And I feel like there's just, I mean, having done this work for a long time, I feel like more and more and more, we are really having intentional conversations about people who are bi plus, as opposed to, it often felt like an add-on, like and by the way, we need to also include, I've noticed, I try not to peek into the comments, but I have to admit to you, I did peek into the comments because I break every rule. If there's a rule, I've broken it. And that was the first one. But I noticed a couple of people have asked about why you were saying bi plus versus just saying bi. Would one of you be willing to explain that to people? Because that definitely is an evolution of language.
I can tackle this. So bi plus is essentially an umbrella term, and it refers to anybody who is attracted to more than one gender. So that whether you use the word bi, bisexual, pansexual, queer, fluid, any other word, if you are attracted to more than one gender, you are welcome under the bisexual plus umbrella. I see a lot of people ask me if like one person can identify as bi plus. Sure, I'm not going to stop you. And like Mackenzie was saying, like a lot of people within the queer community use multiple identifiers for themselves, but typically bi plus refers to a collective umbrella term.
Thank you. These numbers were really promising. I think they're going to fuel a lot of conversations, and hopefully the work that's happening now is going to make it easier for people to be more visible and to actually be out. So I want to know, because, at PFLAG, we like doing things. So what should people be doing? So first of all, what recommendations do you have in terms of resources out there? But also, can you both talk a little bit about a few ways that people can support people who are bi plus, especially as they are entering post-secondary education and entering the workforce, because it is definitely a very different world. So maybe first behaviors and then talking about resources.
Totally. I can take a couple of behaviors, and I'm sure Alexandra will have more to add. But one really major thing that I have noticed is that often, this is kind of new, but often when talking about LGBTQ issues like the Supreme Court decision last June or even the Equality Act at this point, there's been a lot of gay, lesbian, and trans, saying protection for gay, lesbian, and trans people. In the legal language itself, it's inclusive of bi people as well. The language isn't necessarily as modernized as ideal, but with legal language that kind of can happen. And so one first thing is to just be inclusive of the entire LGBTQ community. If you mean LGBTQ, say that rather than just saying gay, lesbian, and trans. There's no reason to actually actively remove bi people from that unless bi people are not included, in which case that's a bigger issue. Right. When it comes to workplace policies, be inclusive of the entire LGBTQ community, including bi people on it. Ensure that if you have protections around harassment, especially of marginalized groups, include bi people in that. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people who are usually inclusive say, biased things about bi people, sometimes with malice, sometimes without. But it has happened, not at PFLAG, I'm new here, but in previous communities and roles, I have heard that, unfortunately. When you're in your daily life, be inclusive of bi people and be inclusive and understanding of the idea that identities can change. I think that unfortunately, many of us can still have some of these biases that, if someone starts dating someone of a gender like their own, we might just assume that they're gay. Or if we see someone who presents a certain way and has a partner of a different gender, we might just assume that they're straight and ask questions that aren't necessarily fair. That's something that we all kind of have to work. I know that I still do, even as I've done a lot of work on bi issues, I still will find myself falling into those traps. Or having these out-of-date, incorrect, harmful ideas about bi people and how they have to act in order to, own the label, or, negative behaviors that have been associated through stereotypes. So it's a lot of unlearning, and it's not, I'm not going to say that it's easy, but I'm also not going to say that it's hard. It's just being attentive and keeping that in mind in your personal life. And then when it comes to policies or more technical aspects, including the bi community by name, being inclusive in language in that way.
Absolutely. It's about being mindful, I think, for a lot of us, just being mindful. Alexandra, can you talk about either behaviors but certainly some resources too?
I think Mackenzie really nailed it on the behavior front. Certainly, including bi plus people, and again, sort of disaggregating them, so that there are specific needs, and same with the trans community, like trans community specific needs, bi community specific needs, multiple shades within the LGBTQ plus community are being ensuring that they are addressed and not lumped together really will make such a huge difference. In terms of specific resources, I'm a little biased, but I definitely think everyone should check out the Bisexual Resource Center. We really lean into the resource part of our name. And yep, there's the website. And we've got a lot of great pamphlets, including like on how to be a good ally, like really, learning the 101 of bi plus, but we also have, good pamphlets and resources and support groups about the different intersections within the bi plus community. And if you go to bihealthmonth.org throughout the month too, we have a whole share kit available that has a plethora and a cornucopia of resources for everybody. The Trevor Project has how to support bisexual youth as a pamphlet, and also the BRC blog. We're updating that super regularly with the help of our new board member, Shayna Macy Warner, excuse me. And just follow us on social media and check out our website for as many resources as you'll take. We have.
Thank you. And I have to say, you really should visit those websites. I've spent a ridiculous amount of time digging into stuff, and there's just so much good stuff there. I'm wondering if Jamie can pop back in. I've seen we've had a lot of comments during today's conversation, but I wanted to see if Jamie wanted to elevate any of those or if we had some questions, because I admit I didn't read that fast.
So I have not seen any questions other than the one that you have already addressed. But if people who are watching have questions, now is the time to submit them. And a little self-servingly, I am going to pull up a number of comments that wanted to welcome Mackenzie to the PFLAG team. Some of our coworkers, Kathy Godwin, who's the board president, lots of people just wanted to give you a warm welcome. So there's that. There was one comment that I wanted to elevate really quickly because I think it is extraordinarily important, and I'm just scrolling down. Raquel mentioned that they absolutely loved Mackenzie's suggestion for social spaces beyond bars and how important that is going to be sort of now and in the future. So I wanted to give that some snaps. But other than that, I am not seeing questions. I do want to ask one, though, if that is okay. And Jean Marie is going to know where this come from. There's been a meme sort of going around after this article was released that makes the case that part of the reason you are seeing what seem like such significant increases in people who identify as LGBTQ plus right now is because people in the past were in the closet or lost their lives to HIV and AIDS or didn't have that social acceptance. And it sounds to me like the group here sort of agrees with that assessment, that it's not that people weren't there, it's that they weren't safe to be out and to show the world who they are.
Yeah,
I completely agree.
Yeah, same. If you look back at so many of the boots on the ground folks who continue to shape the LGBTQ advocacy movement, a lot of them were and are bi plus as well as trans and BIPOC. The LGBTQ community has always been intersectional and built up by folks with intersecting marginalized identities, and that's definitely not going to change anytime soon. So we need to be as inclusive and supportive as possible and really take their lead.
And can I ask a question? Are there any particular writers or thinkers in the bi space that either of you really love and would say, if you've never read this person's stuff, you definitely should get there? I mean, I kind of love recommendations if I can be so aggressive.
Alexandra, correct me if I'm wrong with the author's name. I don't have the book in this room, and I wish I did. But there's a book called Bi Notes for a Bi Revolution. I believe it's by Sherry Eisner. Am I saying? Okay, great. That was a fantastic book that I read a couple years ago. Sorry, I had one of my roommates read. They loved it, so I highly recommend that. It provides a really strong history as well as kind of a breakdown into different communities within the bi community, as well as looking towards the future.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think that's definitely a classic one. I know we're coming up on time here, but quick plug, the Bisexual Resource Center does have a book section. I would also recommend Getting by Robin Oakes and Recognize the Voices of Bisexual Men, which is edited by Dr. Harakuti and Robin Oakes. And also Getting By has a Spanish translation called I don't want to butcher it, but it's also on the BRC website, so folks should definitely check that out. I also, in terms of content creators, I love Blair Money is really an excellent content creator on TikTok and Instagram, and a million others I could go on. But again, follow the BRC, and we try to spotlight a few every month.
Awesome. Well, we are once again, as it happens every week, out of time. But we're definitely going to continue this conversation. Alexandra, thank you for coming in and joining us. Mackenzie, welcome, and thank you for being willing to jump in. Jamie, thank you for doing one more show. I appreciate all of you. This conversation is so important, so thank you. As we say at the end of every single show, run fast, laugh hard, and be kind. We will be back again next week with another great topic. We are looking forward to seeing you. Please, everybody, be safe, and please continue to wear your masks no matter what's happening in your state. Have a great week, everybody.